has the goal to present and discuss cutting-edge projects and activities dealing with the many aspects of AI tech and policy. And today we have the great pleasure to welcome Professor Katarzyna Wac, who is a leading expert in digital health. Professor Wac is a professor at the Geneva School of Economics and Management at our very own University of Geneva. And she's engaged in many stimulating and high-profile research projects, including, as you can see on her own visual today, quality of life QOL technology research and the lab that she animates. And today, she will present her project, as you can see on the screen, AI at Care, Laws and Ethics and Algorithmic Bias in Healthcare. And as done in our past AITPT sessions, the presentation by our speaker will be followed by comments made on the presentation by two commentators. And today our commentators are, first of all, Professor François Fleuret, who is an AI expert from the computer science department from our own University of Geneva, as well as second commentator, Mrs. Ria Keshagia, digital health law specialist and a colleague of ours from our own digital law center. We will then open the virtual floor for discussion with our speakers and our commentators. What I want to say in this short intro is that this session will be recorded and will be made available online so that people who could not attend today will have the opportunity to watch it later on. Without further ado, let me wish you all a very stimulating AITPT session, and I now turn to Professor Katarzyna Wac for her presentation.
Thank you very much for this invitation and this introduction. And I'm really looking forward to share our experience in our Danish project related to Danish healthcare system. And here is the names of the other team members who are now who are in Denmark and who are contributing to this work. The project just has started last year, so there is a lot of floor for interesting discussions from technological perspective as well as law perspective. So let me set up the stage. Thinking about healthcare, we're thinking about patients. This is a typical patient's older person who is having type 2 diabetes for many years, heart attack some years back, as well as hip fracture and replacement. And this person loves cooking as well as match to match loves food and different unhealthy for health foods as she's a diabetic. This is her healthcare kit. This is her medication counter and her self-management corner in the kitchen, and that's her delicious food. And this is a comorbid patient, which we see more and more in our healthcare system. The person is very stubborn, and how do I know it? It's because it's my mother. Example of my mother, however, is not she's not the only one, and all of us, unfortunately, because of our daily life behaviors, we may be diagnosed somewhere in the future with top 3 chronic illnesses, which are cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and COPD. And the research evidence shows that, as I said, our daily behaviors contribute up to 40% to the probability of future disease and health problems, and may cause death. And what are behaviors we're talking about? It's tobacco, poor diet, physical inactivity, as well as alcohol consumption, and more. So how this life goes? We are born, and then we have some happy childhood and youth, and there is a moment we may ask ourselves, which path are we taking? Is that going to be a long, healthy and interesting and inspiring path of healthy aging, or because of our daily life behaviors, we are prone to disease and earlier death. So here I provide an example of the algorithmic approach to calculating the future risk of type 2 diabetes. So the variables contributing to the future risk are related to our origins, race, family history, age, gender, then cholesterol levels, blood pressure, diet, and physical activity. I have marked these different variables in different fonts. The first ones are related to variables which we cannot change. We can hardly change our age. We may change our gender, but that may not be a particular way of avoiding this risk in the future. We may not change our family history. Then the cholesterol and blood pressure are these clinical variables which are picking up at our healthcare appointments. And then the diet and physical activity are the ones which are modifiable risk factors, which are in our hands, as I would say. So I would like to present the project from which our own project spin off. So we have been collaborating with colleagues from University of Southern Denmark on this project, in which the overall vision was, can we leverage the electronic health records for health of Danish citizens? It's very important that I set up a stage with respect to the Danish healthcare context, so Danish context of healthcare use. It's a state-run universal healthcare system, tax-funded. There is a unified health record for the whole country. There is obligatory unique citizens ID. It's called CPR number, which is given at birth or acquired when somebody gets residency in Denmark. There is obligatory use of so-called e-box. So there is this secure place in which all the information from governmental organizations, all the official documents are ending up and they are communicated to the citizens. So actually there's also very much a paper-free approach to different administrative procedures. It's very interesting and important to understand the role of Statistic Denmark. It's a separate governmental organization, which is a research stakeholder. It's an organization which provides statistics to the government and supports in decision-making. However, also it acts as a stakeholder, which is very important for this particular project. So the TOF research project is ongoing since 2016. It has been led by research of Unit of General Practice, and as you can imagine, that's where the first contact, the first primary prevention takes place, where the citizen, the individual, maybe not yet the patient, diagnosed patient, that's what I mean, comes to a general practitioner and is being asked if particular data sets which are already stored in electronic health records could be leveraged for this person's health. It's this project, the TOF project, relies on primary electronic health data use, and the goal would be to understand who is at risk of particular diseases. As I told you, it's cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and then following that, there will be a behavior intervention study. So it's a non-randomized design in which whoever would be at risk would get into intervention. There is a very important aspect of ethics and local ethical approvals at the University of Southern Denmark. And then there's additional organizations like the Committee of Health Research Ethics for the Capital Region of Denmark, and then Danish Data Protection Authority, who needed to approve such a project. And also, it's very interesting and important to understand again this role of Statistic Denmark DST, which in order any organization to use and access the data sets stored at Statistic Denmark premises needs to be so-called licensed. So it needs to prove that the infrastructure of this particular organization is good enough, secure enough, in order to access these resources, as well as the persons who are going to be working on the data sets are properly trained. So the TOF project is selected random subsample of population from 2 municipalities. It was 9,400 participants between 30 and 59 years old. And as I said, it was very interesting and important to understand the role of Statistics Denmark holding the electronic health records data sets, as well as being able to be in touch with the citizens. So let's have a look at the data sets. The study has happened in 2016, and the persons who were asked for consenting their participation in the study allow access to their retrospective data sets. And we're talking about a population registry, we're talking about age, gender, family, immigration status, unemployment history, income, education, and more. Then additionally, there are self-reports, which are specific for this study. So self-reports about diet, physical activity, smoking, alcohol, stress, social support. Then electronic health records, as we can expect, the healthcare use, diseases, lab tests, weight, height, cholesterol, blood pressure, and other variables which are related to the healthcare use, and then medication. So that's another registry. So this is all data being stored at Statistics Denmark and being accessed in frame of this project for the participants who have consented to be in the study, and then it's being analyzed. Another piece of information about the TOF project before I present our part in this vision, in fulfilling this vision: 2,661 person consent. And who are this person comparing to this subsample being contacted? They're female, they're mostly female, they're mostly higher age, they're mostly Danish, they have a high income, they have a high education, and they are less sick than overall population. Then, given this 2,661 participants in the study, 26%, so I'm going from the left to right, 26% of this sample has been already diagnosed with one of the chronic illnesses, and it's already taken care of by the healthcare system. They are purple, color code per. Color red, 22% have been diagnosed with at high risk of a particular one of 3 diseases, and then will being taken care for behavior change and maybe even a medication treatment related to their risk of chronic illness. 23% do not have a specific pre-diagnosis of one of the chronic illness. However, this population is pointing out they do not, they smoke, or they are not doing enough sports, or they are having other self-reported risky behaviors, which may lead to the future of diseases. And then this particular 22% is taken care by the local so-called commune, which is a municipality way of sending people for coaching sessions and sports activities and additional activities outside of the healthcare settings. And then the 29% has been healthy, is not at risk, and it's outside of the healthcare system, outside of this project as well. So how interesting is that when you look at this particular subsample of population, almost half of the sample population, so we take a red and orange groups, qualifies for intervention. So here we come with our project, looking into what would be a particular ways of looking for perspective of the data and the law perspective. We are looking into, we are accessing the data from a TOF project, and we're looking into the secondary electronic health record usage, helping to answer the question if the electronic health record could work on behalf of the individuals to keep them healthy. Our goal was to evaluate these different disease risk models, additionally leveraging the existing medically validated algorithm, as I show you the one for the diabetes, as well as looking into additional variables which were collected and could be leveraged for the risk models. We would like to introduce intentional biases. So, for example, look at the distribution of the gender, age, immigration status, and other variables, which are very sensitive variables, and understand how would that change the particular risk assessment models, and what would that then be implications for maybe policies or law and healthcare costs. That's an interesting aspect, right? So if we over label participants, individuals with their probability of chronic illness, then there is of course a higher healthcare cost in the short term, but what does it mean in the long term? So there is this different aspects of variables we are going to look into and contributing to the future cost. Before we even did anything and got this particular project running, we needed to go through the local ethics. Also the same Danish authorities, Committee on Health Research Ethics for Capital Region of Denmark, Danish Data Protection Authority, explain a lot of times and write a long documents about why we exactly need to access this data set. And SDU, our colleagues at SDU are data controller, we are data processor in this process. And then also I was the only one at the computer science department in University of Copenhagen who got, I was the only one, the first one who got a license for accessing the Statistic Denmark data sets. So now we'll have a short discussion points before we go into a longer discussion, looking into algorithmic bias, aspects of law and ethical considerations of such a vision, fulfilling the vision of electronic health records and healthcare data sets working on behalf of the citizens to keep them healthy. So when we think about algorithmic bias, I told you that we'd like to introduce, we will know and understand what will be the potential intentional biases being introduced by the design choices of the study, but also what will be the unintentional biases and how can we identify them, and also look into what do they, how do they imply the interpretation of the output of this project. So when we think about the input, the biases of the input side, definitely there was some, our colleagues at you have made some design choices for their study, which then will influence the data we're working with. So we definitely have a sample selection bias. For example, the study inclusion age for participants, the invitation channel, I told you about e-box, but it may be possible that some, even if it's obligatory, some of the individuals do not use it. And all information was in Danish, so that could be also a biasing factor influencing who has got into the study. What are the variables particularly being asked for, right? So besides the variables which are the then led by the medical research, but there was also variables where they asked for stress. But for example, when we had discussions later, sleep is very important variable contributing to risk of chronic illness. However, it has been not considered at all in the study. What's the electronic healthcare record data structure we are going to deal with? What is the data model? How much is missing? How much data is missing? And how do we interpret and code the free notes and text which is available there? As well as I already told you at the beginning, the particular diet and physical activity rely on self-reports. So what's the self-report bias? How the patients summarize their behaviors? What's the memory bias? Maybe some aspects of social disability are then available or imply our biases in the answers and in the way we are going to analyze the data sets, because the patients may want to perceive themselves better than they are. So there's more. We can discuss it later, but then let's think about different algorithmic and risk assessment output biases which may be introduced in such a project. So the first thing is the algorithm itself. We do have assessment of this three risky chronic illness, risk for this chronic illnesses. However, there may be more other, right? So there are not just it's not our choice of specific risk assessment. It has been already again the design choice by our colleagues at SDU. What are the statistical biases, data distribution assumptions and time frames for different variables which are taken into consideration in the algorithm? What's the fairness criteria? So when we think about subgroups like age, Danish versus non-Danish, we will be thinking about different groups of immigration status. Then how do we analyze this particular criteria and biases for these groups and subgroups? Specifically also because we know we already have a bias sample at the beginning. How shall we avoid overgeneralization of the results for providing this algorithm for automatic risk assessment for the population? And then looking into correlation versus causation. What's, for example, is stress the moderating variable, or it's something which further on we'll need to go back to our medical colleagues and understand the influence on risk of chronic illness. And there may be more. The second thing is the law, the specific aspects of a law. We are looking into the European Social Charter article and the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which is related to protection of the right to health, including everyone's right to access to preventive health care. And specifically Article 12, which 12C requires to take steps to ensure the prevention, treatment, and control of epidemic, endemic, and occupational and other diseases. So when we analyze the law from perspective of obligation of the state of keeping the citizen in the right health, what would be the role of TOF project and also our role contributing to this prevention study? So from the law perspective, we are looking into aspects of information availability for the citizens. Do they know that such a project is taking place? Do they know they can use the healthcare resources? Is the way of recruitment, is the way of managing such a project done in non-discriminatory way? Is the way of further imagine, again, if the vision gets fulfilled where the electronic health record works on behalf of the citizen to keep them healthy, can we really avoid all the discrimination aspects? And of course, also can we assure the transparent data processing and again assuring the privacy of the individuals? So these are just potential snapshots, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion, looking into ethics, thinking about the self-governance and autonomy of the individuals whose data is being then processed, treated, and potentially brought back to them in form of the additional services, keeping them healthier in the long term. Thinking about individual autonomy, the citizen may have questions about the ownership of the data. Is the data secure? Who can have access to this data and for what? And I also need to say that there's a big note on Danish population data literacy, as well as social acceptability of solution, and not just a solution, but organization and Statistic Denmark seem to be having a very big high respect of Danish citizens, trusting their data is being secured and shared in proper ways with scientists like us. As well as I said, data literacy, respect to use of e-books and other electronic means of communication between in healthcare and other organizations, and there is a high digitization level and being accepted. And then privacy protection with respect to assurance of yes, the data being private data being protected from somewhere leaking out or being disclosed. I have to again say it's really always related to the fact that there's a high trust in this particular infrastructure support and this government organization called Statistic Denmark. And there may be more. So yes, Statistic Denmark playing a really nice place role in this research project. So with this, I will finish my short presentation of the project, and I would love to go into the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Katarzyna, for this very stimulating presentation, which I'm sure will give a lot of avenues and food for thought for sure, and also avenues for discussion. Just one quick reaction from my side about what you said about the individual autonomy to which you just referred, which I'm sure will also be touched upon in our later discussion, as to the potential need to somehow go into some kind of paradigm shift to move from individual autonomy to some kind of a collective exercise of rights. I think this is something that may come and may actually already be implemented to some extent with the emergence of intermediaries, data intermediaries, which I'm sure will be something to observe closely, at least from a European perspective. In any event, let me now turn to our first commentator, François Fleuret, who will speak, as I understand, mostly from a tech perspective, which is, of course, of high value. François, thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jack. So it's a pleasure to join the discussion today, because I'm, as somebody who is mostly designing AI methods, I start to see, I start to be very concerned by the actual impact of what we do in the real world. On the very topic of biases is central, and it's going to be one of the key problems for deploying things in the real world. So to really gain the benefits of AI without having too much, I would say, collateral damage. So what I'm going to do in my comment is mostly to maybe re-explain why bias is such a problem, and why, unfortunately, I believe there is no silver bullet and there is no way to find a technical solution. So it has to be addressed, and that's why I'm so happy to see Kate giving this presentation and working on those topics at UNIGE, because we truly need to have this type of perspective on the problem. We can't just, as we have been doing for years, move fast and break things doing AI methods without. I was thinking during this the presentation that people doing AI, I think historically we're thinking it's just bytes. You know, it's not. We are not building nuclear devices, so we can just look for efficiency and we don't really care about effect. So the first aspect that we have to keep in mind is that modern AI is data-driven, which means that for maybe to compare to standard computer science, standard way of writing programs and standard way of doing AI, so the old ways with formal specifications, the idea of modern AI, which is data-driven, is that some parts of the program that the computer is going to execute are left unspecified and are tuned on data, which really means you can really see it as you write 10% of the program and 90% of the software, 90% of the source code is going to be optimized in a way that maybe, and that's a key aspect I will come back to, that may be unintelligible to humans so that it works on data. So a way of understanding this would be that you have at your disposal some developers from an alien species who have no idea of the social norms, no idea of the ethical aspect for humans, nothing, but you can give them your data and say, okay, write some code that on those data does what it's supposed to do. And so the problem is that, of course, it immediately transfers biases from the data to the program. So any aspect of the data, surrepresentation of a subgroup, exactly what Kate has listed, poor way of acquiring the data, bias in the very mean of acquiring the data. So people have to respond to survey and to speak a certain language, and will immediately impact the data and consequently impact the algorithm. So when you are dealing with an algorithm which is simple, so there was this example recently of somebody who had a credit card from Apple, because Apple now in the US provides a credit card service. And he was surprised because his credit level, his credit ceiling was something absurd, like 20 times the credit ceiling of his wife was the same card. And so they thought it was because he had the better credit score, and they checked, and actually his wife has a better credit score. And actually, when they investigated a bit and asked Apple to have some more explanations, it happened that the algorithm had been tuned on data, and due to historical data, husbands tend to make more expense than women. I mean, the 60s, the 50s, and so the algorithm naturally, like a good computer, was just fitting to those data and say, okay, it makes more sense that a male have better ceiling, higher ceiling. So if the algorithm is simple, so if at the end you have this data tuning, but which may be problematic, but at least you have a clear recipe in the end, and the human can have a look at this recipe, he or she may fix the problem. So it's clear that a human, if at the end sees that the piece of algorithm has a complete different way of working on male and on female, a human would be like, okay, something is wrong. We have to go back to the way we are making this algorithm. We have to fix things. And then we come to the second point, is that unfortunately, the algorithms that those learning systems generate are usually so complicated that there is no way of understanding that way. So there is no, you cannot look at what the training procedure produced, and as a human, having this understanding of the data processing happening in the program and be like, of course, it's going to fail in this case, this case, and this case. So we come to the second point, which is that the modern models, modern AI models are extremely complicated. So they are, I don't know if you follow a bit, but you have those crazy numbers. They have billions of parameters. And sometimes it's a bit hard to grasp this when you are from outside the field, but we really have a very, very poor understanding of what's going on. So we know they work. We know that if you put an image of a dog, they will say it's a dog at the end, or you put whatever, you ask a question, they're able to answer. But we have a very poor understanding of what processing actually happened in the model. So now we could ask the question, do we need those very complicated models? And unfortunately, especially for health, they are actually useful. So if you want to process X-rays, if you want to process natural language records, if you want to process complex recordings like the gaits of people or speeches or stuff like that, you really need to have those very complicated models. So now we have the perfect setup for a disaster, which is we are not writing the programs. They are written by automatic systems from data that may inherit the bias. We have a very poor understanding of what they are doing, and they are super useful. So it's not like we are just using them for the fun of using complicated objects. So now, even at a more abstract level, there is no reason that there would be a good class of algorithm that would share an understanding with humans. Again, I would come back to my analogy with alien. There is no reason that we could share an understanding of representation of the world with an alien species. And it's a bit the same for those artificial cognitive systems. There is no reason that the representation, the decision rules they implement, they picked, would be intelligible for us. We may have a completely different way of representing things. So then I will come to maybe, I could list other issues for probably 2 hours, but I should probably move to what are the beginning of the solutions. So some hint for the solutions would be first to reduce the power of those methods. So to accept, okay, we are not going to go for the most efficient ones. We are going for some which are simpler, that in particular provide possibilities for formal analysis. So it's something my group work a bit on. For instance, you want to be sure that your vehicle, if there's a pedestrian on the left, will never do a turn to the left. You want to have a mathematical certainty that this will not happen. That's the first way. A second way would be to still keep these very complex models, but to force them to have a common understanding with us, so that the intermediate representations they work on, for instance, in some way you could see them thinking in language, you would force to align their representation and their way of dealing with the data with our way, but that's tricky. And a third possibility, which is also something we are working on, is to provide interpretability tools. So for instance, to have a post-hoc analysis of a model to understand how it reaches its decision, and so you can judge if it was reasonable or not, and you can decide what was a mistake. So I guess I could stop here. I could speak for hours on those issues because they are really key, but I'm very interested in the rest of the discussion. And maybe I have one question for Kate, because again, I think obviously the solution will not come purely from the technical side, from developing only new algorithm from AI. I think the solution is multi-level at the policy level, and we have to involve people from many. So I was curious if Kate would have some ideas. Let's say, what would be the ideal way that she could envision of what actors should be involved in let's say, in the development and deployment of AI systems, so that the obvious issues she has been describing would be under control and would be mitigated.
Thank you. I will try to be, we can also discuss it for other hours, but I will try to be short. It's definitely interdisciplinary, even transdisciplinary approach of different disciplines, law, computer science, and also social sciences. As with respect to the stakeholders, there are primary stakeholders, primary users of such input. It's a primary users, primary data generators, but also there are secondary and tertiary users. And then we are going closer to the user whose life and health is going to be influenced. And then we go on the levels of, yes, as you said, policy changing, and we go into the levels of economic costs and other social costs for cumulative costs related to the decision making. So when you think about this project in which almost half of the Danish population needs intervention, right? So what's kind of cost we're thinking about in the short term, in the long term, and then also in case there is some, we will show that there will be some specific biases in terms of changing everybody's status, or missing the immigration status, or changing everybody's gender or other socioeconomics. Then what would be then implications for the other actors? So there's interdisciplinarity, and then I would also like to say that my personal opinion is that we have a very high responsibility as educators. So it really comes back also to the education of our students, of the way of thinking about such particular implications of their code and their decisions they made while designing the algorithm, or even looking at the data, the way they look at the data. So one of the outputs in this other project is checklist, bias awareness checklist as the first, one of the first outputs, and the second would be algorithmic design, like a blueprint for designs of AI systems. And I'm thinking further, the last thing would be the certification, some level of certification of such systems, which will be then done in interdisciplinary settings. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm sure that will be addressed and discussed later in the course of our open discussion. But this is definitely extremely stimulating, and grateful to Francois for talking about aliens and like showing where we may not want to go. Let me now turn to our second commentator, Ria Keshagia, who will offer us and share with us a legal perspective on these issues. Ria.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I would like to thank Professor Wac for her interesting presentation on this project about AI at CARE, and the organizers for inviting me today. I will continue my comments will continue the discussion that will be supplementary to the question of Professor Fleuret. The use of machine learning and artificial intelligence in healthcare is a huge topic and is discussed everywhere in the US, in Europe. I take the opportunity here to mention the artificial intelligence white paper published by the European Commission last February. And the paper mentions that it has a dual goal. First, to support the artificial intelligence uptake, and second, to address the risks linked to the particular use of these artificial intelligence systems. With the aim to avoid bias and discrimination. In my view, these dual goals would be the approach when we're thinking about the deployment of artificial intelligence in the society or in general, and in the healthcare system more particular. Now, when I'm looking at the project of Professor Wac, I see that it's an interdisciplinary research project bringing together scientists and legal experts. Interdisciplinary research is an optimal way to succeed in this dual goal that I mentioned earlier, as scientists can address the AI uptake and legal experts can focus on the risks, or it doesn't mean that the other discipline doesn't work on the risks, or legal experts can also address some AI uptakes. Further, it will be useful to see in the future more interdisciplinary projects that engage scientists from other expertise, such as bioinformaticians, as well as healthcare providers, patient groups, representatives from ethics committees, with a view to address all these complex issues coming from AI biases, ethics and safety, governance and oversight, but also improve the data literacy in the society. And I think that the Danish society is a good example, as Professor Wac mentioned, about data literacy. The first point that I would like to make is not very different from what has been discussed so far, and it has to do with the biases in scientific research coming from the plurality of values that are added by the researchers. Artificial intelligence systems must be programmed and trained with a certain data that might be biases and will invariably reflect value judgments of the human contributors. These features, these variables may create, sustain, and exacerbate some scientific biases, and at the end of the day, maybe they contain some errors. This makes me think that we should all reflect whether conscious or unconscious, intentional or unintentional biases that exist in our system should continue or should be we should try to address these subsequent inequalities and inaccuracies in order to produce more inclusive results. And I would like to know more about understanding artificial intelligence, about understanding the artificial intelligence, if this could help us address this bias in scientific research. Another reflection that I had while I was listening to Professor Wac, it has to do with the secondary electronic health records data usage. And more specifically, I was thinking that how we can perform the same project in another country. Now we have a good idea about how electronic health records functions in Denmark. How about if Professor Wac would like to perform the same project in Switzerland? And when I think about that, I see that the comparison of the data sets could be problematic for two reasons. First, there might be a lack of homogeneity among the scientific data sets and results probably coming from one country to the existing results, or the wish to produce the same results in another country. And that enhances the need for standardization of data collection and sharing, and at the same time to promote interoperability standards, especially for health data. I also see a lack of harmonization of laws regarding the international data sharing and the data protection laws impediments, but we don't have much time to go through all this. So I would like to continue by giving a good example of international data sharing. This comes from the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, which is a policy framing and technical standards setting organization that seeks to enable responsible genomic data sharing within a human rights framework. And when there is a discussion about discrimination and biases, this consortium has introduced a genomic discrimination observatory in order to prevent discrimination based on genomic data. This is quite general, but I'm sure that somebody can go through the website and see exactly what they do. The other reason of this scientific bias is another reason for this data is available is that there might be a problem of unequal access to such technologies, inequalities in the opportunity to benefit from artificial intelligence, and inequalities in the burdens generated by artificial intelligence. And this we can understand it better if we think about the example of China. China is a much more advanced country in artificial intelligence technologies. And if we see in Europe, in the UK, the National Health Service System is estimated, the NHS, maybe you know better the acronym, is estimated to invest over £200 million to build AI infrastructure. How this can be compared with the investment coming from low-income countries. This consideration raises the question, how does the use of AI in public health can bridge the gap between those who may benefit from a better healthcare system that already has a good investment on artificial intelligence systems, and those countries who don't have the systems? Is it possible to create an open data sharing culture when we have these different situations? Further, I would like to raise a question when I think about this that Professor Wac mentioned about leveraging the reps of such projects in the health system. And this is more specific, not so general as my other comments, and is related to the accountability for harm to patients in parallel with the duty of medical practitioners to be responsible and promotes patient safety when AI is used as a means of clinical decision support system. For example, you have mentioned about the diabetes patients, and I would like to ask you if there is a case of a person who is at high risk of having diabetes and cardiovascular complications in the future. Should the medical practitioner ask this person to, first, should this medical practitioner decide to put the person in this program that about prevention, asking his explicit consent? And if he does or she does that, should the medical practitioner disclose to the patient that this decision is not human, but it's a decision coming from an algorithm? Or should the medical practitioner be held accountable or liable in case there is a problem, a malfunction or inaccuracy in output regarding the treatment recommendations? I would think that Article 14 of the Declaration of Taipei on the ethical standards and on the use of health data clearly states that individuals have the right to request for and be provided with information about the data and its use. And it continues, health database should adopt adequate measures to inform the concerned individuals about their activities. While the existence of ethics committee guarantees that these two conditions are met in the course of time. So I'm still wondering whether these standards, we have here it's very clear that we have some principles, some guidelines, but is it possible to use these principles and these principles be respected in the course of this context? I would, when I was reflecting on that, I thought about the recent sanitary crisis and the need, the situation in the intensive care units, and the need to prioritize the patients based who would enter to the IC units. And I was thinking that if the protocols to prioritize the patients were based on artificial intelligence or algorithms, would the medical practitioners would be held accountable for choosing some patients over other under these urgent circumstances? Finally, my comment, the last comment I would like to make is quite technical, legal technical, and it's related to the parts of algorithmic processes that are outside the scope of data protection laws. And this is particularly important as GDPR and other data protection laws are applicable when personal data is processed. But we can understand here that these predictable models, they do not relate to an identifiable person. And this makes us think, what are the other tools that we have available to guarantee patients' safety? And I would say that here we should look at other human laws as discrimination laws. We should look at contract laws. And I take here the opportunity to mention that you said that you have access, you have already access a license to access data. I'm sorry, I have to make something else problem. And also look at self-governance mechanism that can address the problems that evoke among healthcare workers, medical practitioners, and other people involved in this processing of data that are not covered by data protection laws. While artificial intelligence has yet to deliver its promises to healthcare, I hope that these thoughts can serve as a starting point for the promotion of fair, trustworthy, and transparent use of artificial intelligence in the healthcare ecosystem. Efforts to further map and understand the above considerations ought to be accomplished in such a way that capture the multiple perspectives that reflects the diverse populations who will should be impacted by AI approaches used in electronic health records, policy, and research. In this context, we should consider the role of ethics as well as laws such as data protection laws with respect to the humans, and build trust in artificial intelligence and machine learning. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ria, for these very rich and detailed comments. One quick reaction to, I guess, the last one about the fact that we also have to deal with data which may not be protected as personal data. I think it goes back to what you said earlier, Katarzyna, in terms of transversality, but here legal transversality, to try and find ways to adopt regulatory frameworks which may apply irrespective of the nature of the data at issue. And I think, at least from a European perspective, that we already have this trend progressively put in place, where we see transparency requirements and expectations with respect to AI processing also applicable in a non-personal data context. So I think it's something that definitely also need to be observed in this specific discussion about health data, but which, as I was just saying, would tend to apply even more broadly and more fundamentally to all type of data. Katarzyna, I'm sure you want to react to the comments, or at least some of them, that Ria has just made.
Thank you very much, Julia, for this. I actually played guilty of not having answers. There are so many questions. And as a computer scientist, I take privilege of pointing out, we are going to work on this. And it's interesting case in which we also may think of aspects of right to disease, right? So there is a right to health, and there is a lot of this very interesting and important questions you have pointed out with respect to us thinking, like if it just from pure computer science perspective, there is a data, we could develop algorithms which will pin out and even really start notifying the persons who are, based on their profile already existing in their data, be potentially at risk, right? But then who is going to, what's the overall workflow of such a system service in which the electronic health records is working on behalf of the patients and contacting them through the healthcare system towards the preventive actions, and then who is taking the what's the liability of the fact that these decisions have been made by by the machine. So in the current TOF project, what I really love about the vision of is the electronic health record potentially being able to leverage towards the assuring the health of the citizens is the fact that so far what we have right now when we start this project, and also looking at our work done by our TOF colleagues, everything is scrutinized. All the questions are being, all the design changes, all the design of the study are being properly motivated from medical perspective, from other perspective. But we do have some answers, but actually the aspects of what happens if we really want to go automatic, and what happens if we really would like to this to become a service for the citizens, we do not have this answer. So I plead guilty of not having answers, but I would like to assure all of us that I'm contributing with our best scientific efforts to find the answers.
Thanks very much, Katarzyna. You were just saying that as a computer scientist, you're saying that you'll be working on it, and as lawyers, as we all know, the answer would be it depends. So I guess every area has is different ways to address tricky questions. In any event, perhaps would be good also to open the floor and to broaden our perspective also from a geographic standpoint. And I see that we have the privilege to welcome Limor Schmerling with us today. Welcome, Limor. You just a quick word of intro. You're managing director of the Israel Tech Policy Institute, and we've been in touch recently, and we look forward to welcoming you in a future session along with Sivan Tamir, whom I see and I welcome here today. Perhaps, Limor, you would like to also react to what has been discussed, knowing your very extensive expertise and activities that you may want also to present in these digital health issues. Limor.
Thank you very much, Jack, for this very generous introduction. I will say just a few maybe short observations. One thing to share that at ITPI, at the Israel Tech Policy Institute, Sivan and I have been working on this topic of secondary use of health data for research for the past year and a half or 2 years. And we've just recently published a report that looks at the evolving regulations of 8 countries around the world, Israel among them. And these are all initiatives that are meant to allow by legislation for the repurposing of health data for research and for big data research, and potentially also for AI development. And I think many of them are inspired by the OECD Health Data Governance Guidelines. And they are all attempting to also correspond and comply with privacy protection, data protection principles, and other ethical principles. And they're mostly new from the last year or two. Israel is among them, Australia, Finland, the US has a very different framework and a very different health space, but there are also laws that are either planned or already established in Ireland, England. And I think that there's a lot to do still moving forward, since it's very difficult to implement them. So when we started looking at this, I was very pleased that so many governments have decided to enact such elaborate legislations to address the questions of repurposing health data for research and creating various safeguards and de-identification and privacy enhancing technologies to be implemented, and ethical boards to be more professional and specific to data projects, to non-interventional health research, not Helsinki committees, but health data ethical committees. And this is all very difficult to implement from what we're seeing here in Israel, and from colleagues that we recently have done a workshop together with the OECD and the Israel Ministry of Health. And we've shared experience with many countries around the world, and it's very difficult to implement all of these safeguards, all of these regulations. So on the one hand, it's very promising to have them. It's better to have a detailed checklist of things to do than to be absolutely clueless and just make your way as you go along. And I think that this also connects to one of my one of the points I wanted to make in reference to this interesting discussion is that we are dealing with collaborations over data that are necessarily government and private sector. And that has a lot of implications on how we address ethics and how we manage biases in data. Since, very grossly speaking, the government holds the data or holds the power to legislate and allow access to data. The private sector has a technology and the means to develop the technology to use the data and to make good use of the data and insights. And in this relationship, maintaining ethical principles is a challenge and a must. And this is timely. This debate is very timely because this is happening right now in many places, and especially related to the pandemic. In many places, data hubs for COVID research are being established and require exactly these types of collaboration, both private, public sectors, and also between governments around the world, since it's a pandemic. So, and just one last comment on the previous presentation and debates that I would like to make is that when we focus on bias and the potential for discrimination, and we connect that to the use of data and data fields or data sets that have things like gender, ethnicity, and religion, etc., age, the potential here is for bias from both sides. So on the one hand, perhaps, or sometimes people feel that using these types of data and taking them into account in the research would create biases, maybe between women and men, or age groups, or religions, or ethnicities. On the other hand, sometimes the exclusion of those may create a situation where populations are underrepresented in the research, and therefore they will be underrepresented in the outcomes and the development of healthcare and health prevention. So that is a very two-sided coin that is very important to take note of. And thank you, Jacques, for inviting us to take part. And I'm sure Sivan will be thrilled to participate as well when we progress in this discussion.
Thanks very much, Limor. Perhaps, Katarzyna, you may want to react to these comments.
A lot of comments. Thank you very much. Overall, I would like to say that, yes, the use of, I will comment the last part of the discussion, the use of sensitive variables has been shown specifically in the US healthcare system to be super critical. There has been recently a Nature paper showing that a particular algorithm, which was providing some clinical decision support system for acute care, what was that? Acute care, I don't remember exactly the case, which is used on 200 million US citizens yearly, has been biased in race because it did not have a race as a variable. And how it has been discovered was that the clinicians working in having access to the whole raw data set, as well as the output of the algorithm suggesting some specific treatments choices, they kind of reverse engineer, and they said if we would take all these other variables in consideration, their decisions would be different. And they tried to decompose the root cause of what's missing and the race, and that's a recent unfortunate scientific advancement in respect to how bad it can go if nobody's watching and nobody's taking critical decisions into what, taking critical view on this black box approach, and particularly just taking the decision, the output as a taken. So as I would like to say that this specific aspects of critical variables, we are going from computer science perspective to how would I say it, mess up with the data and look into what would be the particular implications. So far, I do understand, and I know that the TOF project and our colleagues at SDU doing their best efforts in understanding the influence of these variables in the from the current evidence-based medical research on what's the risk of particular, for particular ages and genders and origins. So these variables are included. We are going to do our particular sandbox approach with respect to what would happen if these variables will be missing, misled, mislabeled, hidden, protected. So thank you.
Thanks very much. I think Sivan Tamir, a colleague of Limor from the Israel Tech Policy Institute, would also be pleased to share a few thoughts. Sivan, please.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Jack, and thank you for having us here today. It was very interesting so far. I would like to make a few general comments. First of all, perhaps something you mentioned, Jack, at the end of the presentation, when you talked about inclination perhaps to participate in research as far as health data is concerned. Well, in this case, I think we can see a movement towards, well, a shift, a sort of an evolution in the perception of research participation, moving from it being considered as a burden to a right, especially for underrepresented populations, all the way to an imperative or a sort of a participatory imperative or a participatory citizenship, which is expressed through the willingness to participate in health data research and in donation of biosamples to biorepositories, all as part of a solidarity-based approach. And this, of course, promotes the notion, I mean, the importance of having the public participate in health data research, but also there is a sort of a reciprocal approach there for where the public is also expecting to share some benefits derived from such health projects. And this is an important point. Another thing is in reaction to what Ria said, I think what she said is illustrated in a sort of a need for a convergence between bioethics principles and AI ethics principles. These are two different sets of principles. The other one is more traditional and old, bioethics, I mean, and AI ethics is one which is being currently developed. And I think, like she said, that we have to look into accountability, which is a very dominant principle in AI ethics, as opposed to, or how it comes about with regards to physicians' ethical obligations towards patients. So this is for this point. And lastly, with regards to what Francois said earlier, he mainly, I talked about explainability. I think without expressly saying explainability, he was talking about it broadly. And I think that the general aim is to move towards explainable AI. And there are things ways in which we're looking to get there. And one of the ways is technical transparency. There's been talk about technical transparency, which will allow a certain very basic understanding for perhaps the public or people who are the subjects of algorithmic decision making, which will allow them to have their day in court, to attack certain decisions made concerning various rights and interests of theirs. And so this is one of the steps, or one of the frameworks being developed in order to overcome the problem of non-explainability in AI. That's it.
Thanks very much, Sivan. I think it's very interesting, the comment that you made on my own comment relating to this potential shift, societal shift, which can perhaps be put in an even broader context, in the sense of increased engagement of citizens, as you say, within the framework of citizen science, as we know. I think it's very interesting to observe. And now if we focus again on data, also interesting to see, perhaps a topic for next event, this evolution towards data philanthropy to some extent. And I'm just sharing something that I presented a few years ago. We had a series of events on various aspects of philanthropy, and I was supposed to talk and animate a workshop on IP and philanthropy, and talking about compulsory licensing. And I was just evoking at that time, back in 2015, I think, or 16, data philanthropy, and which to me is really growing much bigger now, and which also can be combined with what I mentioned earlier, in the sense that if perhaps we want to engage more efficiently into data philanthropy, that somehow presupposes that there is more collective action. So that can be done individual by individual. We have to find ways to make it happen and facilitate it in a way which makes it easier for third parties, potentially for research purposes, to use the data in an easy way, and to basically to reduce transaction costs. So I think it's quite interesting to observe, and to, as you indicated, also to see the broader societal change potentially. With one question that I would have to all, and before giving the floor to Francois, who has raised his hand, is to ask all of you basically whether you think that what we're somehow seeing is influenced in a lasting way by the COVID crisis that we have to face. In other words, do you think that the COVID crisis will somehow bring with it lasting changes that will influence the regulatory, ethical, and also AI landscape in the long term? I know it may not be an easy question, and again, lawyers will say it depends, and computer scientists will say we will work on it. But I'm still asking the question, just to see what would be your take on that.
If I may attempt a response here, I think it highly depends on public trust. I think we've seen, for example, in Israel, we have the deal with Pfizer that in return for having a speedy delivery of large shipments of vaccines, Israel has Israel is going to give Pfizer access or actual data regarding the adverse reactions and others to in the population of the population to the vaccine, and I think this has created some sort of discourse over mistrust of governmental decisions, or perhaps is it are there other interests involved which are not strictly related to public health ones? And so I think trust is a big factor here, which will either motivate or demotivate the public in sharing or participating, sharing their health data or participating in such research in the future.
Thanks very much. Any other reaction? I think it's fascinating the example that you just gave, which confirms something that we all know, is that obviously data sharing is of highest value and can have a strong impact and can be a kind of a negotiation chip in this context, provided, of course, as you mentioned, that this is based on trust. Otherwise, there shall be no data to be shared by the citizens. François, sorry for having you wait so long.
Yeah, thanks. So just to come back to the remark about transparency and interpretability and accountability. So the problem is that except for a very limited class of algorithms, they are very hard to understand. So for instance, there is a class of algorithm called decision trees where you make your decision, the algorithm will make the decision eventually just by checking some properties. And if this decision tree is small, is compact, you as a human have a clear understanding of what it's doing, and especially, and I think it's a fuzzy issue, the very notion of what does it mean to understand what the algorithm will do. My definition would be that you can immediately envision in your mind as a human how it would behave in all the situations that matters. And so a decision tree would be interpretable for a human if you see the first question is what is the gender, male, female, what is the ethnicity, blah blah. You would immediately, as a human, understand what this abstract object, which is the algorithm, will do and why it's not acceptable or acceptable. The problem is that as soon as you move to an algorithm, even as simple as linear regression. So linear regression is this class of method in statistics where you weight things. So again, you lose already a bit of interpretability, but you still may be able to spot some obvious abnormalities. So again, if you see that the predicted values has a lot of weight on the gender or a lot of weight on the ethnicity, you may be unsatisfied with this. But the key issue is that any modern AI algorithms, again, are impossible to interpret that way. It's just a big bunch of computation. You put numbers inside, you get numbers outside, and you really have no idea what's going on. So it's really like a biologist, a neuroscientist studying the brain of a fly or the brain of a mouse or the brain of a worm. We just have some cues about some element, some pathway of information, some things, very crude things that matters. But the kind of properties you would like to check to have some ethical, to know that some ethical principles are enforced or are very, very, very hard to check. So unfortunately, I think it would go a bit beyond the objective of this discussion, but there are some very technical examples which are kind of scary. Like you would take a signal for which the neural network gives a proper decision, and you alter it in a way that for you as a human makes absolutely no difference, and the neural network would do some crazy prediction on it, which means really there is a very, very, very poor alignment between the kind of cognitive processing happening in a modern neural network and the kind of cognitive processing happening in our brains. It's super hard, again, to predict what they would do and to immediately envision that, oh, this is the failure mode, here it will behave improperly, here it will behave properly. So the solution could be that we don't allow those things. You could, and this I would not be against it, that we would say for life and death decision or ethically loaded decision, we do not accept complex algorithms, but then we lose what is today 95% of the magic of artificial intelligence.
Thank you very much, François. Any reaction to what you just said about the magic that we should keep alive to some extent, at least? I think
I did not say this. I did not say this. I just say I was careful. I was careful.
I know. Ria, I guess you had a comment.
Yes, just a quick comment. I don't want to take the time from the participants because I would like to hear more things about this presentation. I would like to answer to Sivan and say that it's the first time that I see you, not the first time that I see you. I saw you last week or 2 weeks ago during the OECD. Congratulations for your presentation. And I would like just to react to what you said about messing two different set of rules. The topic today is quite big. So my intention was just to offer some ground for discussion, some terms that later we can elaborate. And these comments would be different in a different context, that there will be more concrete questions about what are the ethics for accountability, what are the ethics, the AI ethics. And that's, thank you for your remark. Anyway.
Thanks very much. Any further comments, perhaps from Katarzyna?
Summarizing the discussion we have, and all of us agree that it's a very complex, wicked problem in which it evolves and changes over time. So it's not easy to pinpoint a specific solution. And we are working hard, all of us from different disciplines, to try to understand what would be a net, the safety net we could provide for such a wicked problem and not stop our progress, right? Technological progress and other medicine, progress in medicine, and finding out new treatments or pre-diagnosing individuals, as it's case in Denmark. So I would like to just summarize that when I have a discussion with some colleagues in medicine, it doesn't look like they're we are looking into a machine totally replacing the human. And I think we all agree with this. The human aspect of healthcare is very important. So it's not about the machines replacing totally humans and us being treated by computers in the future, but definitely the individuals, the healthcare practitioners who are supported, who their decision is supported by some specific technological outcome and some algorithms, some clinical decision support system, are going to be replaced by the medical practitioners who do not, because basically the cognitive abilities of understanding the different factors influencing the health state, quality of life, are too complex in the long term to just really rely on the human cognition. So as I said, it's not that later, somewhere in the future, we're going to have doctors, just computers treating us, but it will be humans who are supported by computers, which then will be able to also provide information about their own ability, about their own probability of providing a good response. So there will be, I think there is even more need for accurate, viable research in human-computer interaction, and understanding the output and understanding the way of decision making and the aspects of the whole workflow of in which this particular machine, this particular algorithm, this particular black box is taking place and providing some additional value added. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Any other comments or reactions from anyone? Which I don't see, which this means that we can now wrap up. And I would like to thank very much again Katarzyna Wac for the presentation, as well as Ria Keshagia, as well as François Fleuret for their comments, and everyone for their participation, specifically Limor Schmerling and Sivan Tamir, whom we look forward to seeing you again in this session. Let me also share with you on the chat info about our next session, which will be on March the 3rd. We'll be changing topic and talk about cyber wars and AI with the issue of digitization of conflict, with a very esteemed guest speaker that will be Professor Robin Geis, who is working at the Academy here in Geneva, but also professor in Glasgow. We very much look forward to this session. Thanks very much to all of you for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you at an upcoming session of AITPT. And for the speakers and commentators, I suggest that we shall go back to the breakout room. And certainly last but not least, let me also thank very much Anna Andrievich, who is behind the virtual curtain and co-organizes with me the AITPT. Thanks very much, Anna, whom now we see, and you've removed the virtual curtain, which is perfect. So thanks very much, Anna, and looking forward to seeing you all very soon.
Thank you.